So what I really want to do in this video is look at how you how you tackle a question like this at A level, and the only real difference between a question like this at AS and A2 is that this bit at the end says explain why you agree or disagree. That's the only real difference. You can get a question like this in year 12 and then in year 13 as well. It really doesn't matter. And equally, the way you answer the question is very similar as well. So this applies to all of the AQA topics that you can do in the breadth paper. So I'm going to look, there's a little bit of a difference I like to emphasise between the breadth and the depth paper, so paper 1 and paper 2. But this is a Tudors question in paper 1. And it's a really simple question. So Henry VII successfully consolidated his power. That's the statement, and you have to assess the validity of this view. So it's really calling for an argument, so they really want you to look at two sides of the argument, whether or not it was successful and whether or not it wasn't successful. Simple as that. And I think I'm going to look more at the conceptual idea of how to answer the question rather than going into all the tiny specific details. That'll come in later videos. This is more how to answer the essay questions rather than looking at how to answer this essay question. I'm just using this as an example, and so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. So for people who don't understand, who haven't done the Tudors, that they won't understand the knowledge. It doesn't matter. So we'll just get on. We'll just do the question here. So, like all essay questions in probably all of your A levels, you're going to want to have an introduction. You want to have some, I'm just going to put points, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. And then we want conclusion. I mean, this is basically the structure of essays all the way up and beyond university and all the way back as far forward as GCSE. So your introduction, really, what they really want you to look for is they want to see your argument, because you're going to have an argument. You have to say whether or not your view is whether or not he did or he did not successfully consolidate his power. So in your introduction, you really want to outline the argument. So you want to look at each side of the argument. So arguments here. And you want to look at some people think this, some people think that. So look at either side. So maybe outline a couple of points as to why he had successfully consolidated his power, and a couple of points why he didn't successfully consolidate his power. But don't go into any detail, because obviously this is just your introduction. And what the really important bit is, I want you to emphasize, is I want to really look at, you need to really look at your just an initial judgment, a conclusion to your argument. So what you think. So you want to almost conclude in your introduction. So you say either side of the argument, and then you go, however, I think. So what you believe, what you're going to argue. Now, I would argue in this question that he did successfully consolidate his power. So my introduction would look at so they talk about the reasons, the discussion that this question is trying to get out of you, and then towards the end of the introduction, look at, in this essay, I will argue the following. I will argue that Henry VII did successfully consolidate his power. Now, you don't have to agree or disagree. You can go somewhere in the middle. You can sort of say, well, there's aspects of both sides of this argument that are true. And you can also look at, you can just say, well, this is true, however, there are bits that, areas of his reign that weren't as successful. So very similar, you don't have to go one side or the other. And it's very rare that they will give you an essay question that only really has one answer to it. So you have to have discussion. And now the main part of your argument, you want to look at the points of the argument. So this can be really split up in two ways. So you can look at it. So you can look at it more as the topics. You can split it into topics, or you can split it thematically. And I'll talk about these in more detail in a minute. And the middle of your argument, the points you're going to make, really are supposed to back up your introduction. They're supposed to back up the reasons why you think he did successfully or didn't successfully consolidate his power. And then these are going to come through. So once you've done all your point making, your arguments within the essay, you come to the conclusion and go, overall, this is why the argument holds. So I'm going to talk about the topics and the different themes. I'm going to talk a bit more about what that means. So I'm just going to split this down in the middle. I'm going to go topics on one side, and I'm going to talk about thematics the other side. So what you've got to really understand about this paper, the paper 1, is the title is the breadth paper, and if you look at the specification, I think I'll do a video over the specification soon. What they really want from you is a detailed understanding of the different changes across the reign. So it's a very broad period. You're going to be doing, if you're doing the Tudors, it's over 100 years of history. And they want you to, and the quote they use is change in continuity, whether or not things change or continue to be the same across maybe one reign, maybe across an entire reign, maybe across more than one reign of the Tudors. And so that's why you can look at, you might want to look at looking at exam questions thematically rather than using topics. Now, what I mean by topics is different aspects of someone's reign. So in the specification, you are asked, if you watched the other video, you are asked to basically understand Henry VII. You're basically asked to understand his consolidation, his foreign policy, the government, his economy, religion, and you're supposed to do that for each of them. So Henry VII, Henry VIII, the mid-Tudors, and then Elizabeth. So with this question specifically, you could talk about anything. You could talk about anything about his reign. So you could split it into foreign policy for 1 point, and then look at the successes that were made in foreign policy, the more challenging areas of foreign policy, and then maybe you can look at his economy, and then the kind of areas of the economy that were successful or that were failures, and then you can look at religion. I mean, you could also, other points, you can look at government. You can look at his initial consolidation. I mean, you could look at basically any part of his reign. It'd be a lovely question to have in an exam. Look at any part of his reign and just split. You're only going to really have time for about 3 points if you want to really argue it in a lot of detail. So foreign policy, economy, religion, and you could simply do it like that. However, thematically, you'd look more at different periods of the reign. So Henry VII's reign was 1485 to 1509. So that's the entire reign of Henry VII. And you could look at it, you could split that into 3. You could say, well, what were the successes and failures between 1485 and 1490? So you could look at that 5 years, because that's quite an important, if you're studying this topic, that's quite an important area. You could look at it like that. You could then do from 1490 to 1500, and then from 1500 to 1509. And that will be your 3 points. And then within these areas, you talk about successful things that happened, and then failures that happened, and just keep doing that, which is a very good way of doing it as well. I mean, you've got a lot of room. You've got a room to do either, and I think that if you have the choice, I'd say go for this one. But obviously, there might be occasions where it's easier and it makes more sense to go with this one. But you can really look at it either way. Now, within each of the points that you're making, it's important that your argument runs through. So if we go back to the question, if we go back to the question here, it's Henry VII that successfully consolidated his power. Let's say that we agree with this. Let's say that yes, he did, and that's what we put in our introduction. Yes, most convincing argument is that Henry VII did successfully consolidate his power. Okay. Now, if we go back to the points, and we'll do it topically rather than thematically, just for this example. You want to look at, so if we look at his initial consolidation, you want to have really the first point you want to make is an argument that supports your overall conclusion. So an argument that says, yes, he was successful. So I'm just going to put that as a tick. So this was successful. And then we're going to do a cross for failure. So a point against your argument, against my argument in this example. So for your point 1, you want to look at something that is a positive and that supports your argument. Okay, I'm not going to go into the details, but I will in a video specifically about this question. But anything that supports your argument, you don't want to undermine this. You want to go against this by doing a point against within the same paragraph, a point against within the same topic. So there were some areas of his initial consolidation that were successful. Talk about that, and then a little bit about why they weren't successful. And then you want to come back around within the same paragraph, come back around and argue why this is wrong. What's wrong with the failure, and then conclude with, and conclude the point with the tick. It's quite hard to explain overall. So your argument is supporting whether or not he was successful. So he was successful. However, you have to have a bit of balance. You have to have a point against, and then the real high level skill here is to go from arguing the point against, but then going, hang on a minute, this point isn't as powerful, or this isn't as reliable or as convincing as the other point, or saying there are more points on balance in this topic that argue that it's successful. And that, if you do that times 3 with 3 different topics, or you do that times 3 with the different themes, you can easily get a balanced argument that has both sides of the coin, and then link to your conclusion. And now your conclusion has to say what was in your introduction. You can't say in your introduction, overall it's most convincing to argue that Henry VII was successful, but then in your conclusion say, however, I think this isn't true. You have to go back to your introduction and just really pack up all of the points that you've made and put them together in a nice, concise way. And altogether, that really isn't if you think of it like that, that isn't as daunting as you might understand. So you've got your exam question. So you've got your introduction that outlines your conclusion, that outlines your argument that you're going to make. So I'm going to make this argument about this. Then you've got 3 points. Within each paragraph, you're going to look at something that supports your argument, something that goes against your argument, and then argue why that this bit is actually, you argue why this evidence here isn't as convincing as this evidence, or if you want, just add more evidence here. I mean, the high level skill is to undermine this piece of argument here. To undermine this, you do that 3 times. So we'll just do it 3 times. Just being really quick with my writing this. Within 3 different topics, or within 3 different time periods, and then your conclusion literally is just a small little thing. I don't know if I've spelled that. I've just completely butchered the spelling of that, haven't I? And your conclusion should literally sum up everything that you've worked out here. And I'll go into more details and give examples of actual examples of these. But this is just the really conceptual idea of how you should be looking at your argument and how you should be looking at your essay. So you've got your essay here, and you've got your introduction. You've got how you can set it out. You've got how you really set out the points and the paragraphs within the essay, and then you just look at the overall outer the conceptual idea, and we are done.